Hi, this is Siofra's Magic Alcove, and I'm Siofra Bradigan. So I'm redoing the video I tried to do last week about me and my encounters with animals because I kept forgetting when I saw them and what happened, and I was all over the place, jumping through time. So I thought that I would try to do it kind of in order so I wouldn't forget too many of them. I mean, we're talking about the idea of communicating with animals through telepathy. At least that's, I get both pictures and feelings when I have a communication with an animal. And I've had a number of different types. And somebody wanted to know what they were. So here we go. Let's see what happens. Now, the first one that I know about, I don't remember. I was little. I was probably 3.5 or 4 years old, I'm thinking, from what my mother has said. And we had parakeet. I think it was a little blue parakeet. And apparently it passed. It passed away. My mother found it one morning in its cage, dead. And so she waited until I was somewhere, like taking a nap or something like that, and took the bird outside and buried the bird. And then a little time later, I showed up with the bird. Apparently, I found it and I came in with the little bird in my hand and said, "Mom, look what I found. I found whatever the bird's name was," which I can't remember. Um, and my mother was like, "Oh, thank you so much." And isn't that sweet, trying not to upset me. And then waited until I wasn't around again and went outside and reburied the bird. Apparently, this happened 3 or 4 times before it took, and I didn't find the bird. I have no memory of that, but my mother thought it was definitely kind of weird. So she told me about it when I was older. So the first two animals that were important to me were my cat Roscoe and my dog Snoopy. Snoopy was a little dachshund that we got. And we already had Snoopy when Roscoe came along. And um, Roscoe was a rescue. She came to us through a circuitous route. A truck driver, he was driving along the road and hit a paper bag and it worried him. And so he stopped his truck and pulled it over and found out that someone had put some kittens in a bag and put them on the road, which is a terrible thing to do. And then he heard um, the cat that became our cat, Roscoe, in the woods, and he went and rescued her and he took her back with him. And he couldn't keep her because he was a truck driver and he didn't have any place for her. And he gave them to the people that lived across the street from us. This is when we were in Quonset Point, Rhode Island. And and the people across the street, and they had too many cats. And they asked my mother if she would take care of Roscoe for a while, and they were going to see if they could find a placement for her. And so Roscoe came to our house. And my father didn't want us to have a cat. He thought that a dog was enough. And he decided that if Roscoe was a girl, we couldn't keep her. But by the time we found out that Roscoe was a girl, everybody was attached to her, including my father at the time. Um, and yeah, we had Roscoe for a long time. In fact, we had him, we had her through that time in Quonset Point, and then my father left the Navy, and we moved to Virginia, and Roscoe came with us. Snoopy had been killed by a driver on a road not long before then, which was just really sad when that happened, but I was there, so it was not a fond memory, and I felt really bad for our little dog. But I really loved watching them together. I loved watching them with my little sister. They sort of all grew up together, and it was kind of an important family unit. My sister and our dog and our cat. They were kind of like the comic books, the comic strip with Snoopy in it. Yeah, they even had a blanket and chased and played tug of war with my sister in the blanket and everything else. So there were a lot of really good, strong, positive memories with that. Um, so I had a really close connection to the cat, and whenever I was upset, Roscoe would sense it, or I would talk to Roscoe in my head and need to see her, and she would come bounding through the house and up the stairs. By then we were in Virginia because my father had retired and we moved to Virginia. And so, she was around for a longer time than Snoopy. We never did get another dog. The guy who killed our dog wanted to give us another dog, but my parents wouldn't let him. I don't know why. I think it would have helped him. It's one of those things. It's when somebody is trying to make up for something, it can be a gift to allow them to do that. But anyway, so um, yeah, Roscoe was both Roscoe and Snoopy were kind of my teachers. I started learning from them pretty early on because I realized that the people I lived with did not know how to behave properly, and I was trying to find some something to model my behavior after. And so I really observed animals a lot. I observed lots of things. I would often sit watching insects in a little square foot of area or whatever for hours. And, I spent a lot of time in the woods just watching animals and birds and things like that, not necessarily communicating with them, but observing them and trying to understand how they behaved. And I think they started teaching me about boundaries and relationships and things, even though I wasn't allowed to have them yet at that point. My father was pretty terrible to my cat Roscoe, and um, he would torture her, which was a horrible thing, and then brag about it because she didn't fight back. Yeah, that was not a good thing. I didn't like that at all. So when we left my father, we took Roscoe with us, and we moved to an apartment. We were on the second floor of an apartment. And Roscoe had never lived in an apartment before, and I was really worried that something was going to happen to her if we let her outside. So I kept insisting that no one let her out. And a couple of weeks after we moved, my mother decided it was time that she needed to go outside. So she let him out, and she got hit by a car that night. So, yeah. And she wasn't dead instantly. She actually found our apartment in the dark and laid underneath my brother's window and managed to wake him up, which was kind of a remarkable thing because he was, we have very sound sleepers in our family, especially the boys. And my brother was one of those, like my son is one of those too, or at least he used to be. I'll have to ask him and see if he still is. But my brother woke up and actually heard Roscoe's cries and went downstairs and down outside and found her injured. She couldn't move her back legs, and he picked her up and brought her back up and woke up my mom. And then my mother and my brother went and she called the emergency vet, and it was the holidays. I think it was near Christmas or Thanksgiving. It was some kind of a holiday anyway, because apparently the vet was at a party and met them at her office in her party dress. My mom told me. And I was pretty upset that I wasn't allowed to be there. Anyway, apparently. So, mother came home without our cat. And I was pretty upset that I wasn't there for her. Sorry, I didn't think I would cry. It's always a surprise. Anyway, so I don't know how long it was. It was definitely weeks at least, not months. I have no sense of the time. But one day, sitting in the living room watching TV, and I saw Roscoe out of the corner of my eye. She was this white and gray cat. I watched her disappear once in the dark. It was so cool. It was amazing, actually. And I saw her out of the corner of my eye, and she just came over and jumped up on my lap. And I could feel her weight. She just curled up in a ball and sat on my lap. It was her way of saying goodbye. And I really appreciated it. So that was an important moment in my life because it showed me that there's something that continues after the death of my cat, that she could come back and wanted to let me know she was okay. So, yeah. And I don't know how long that happened. It just happened periodically for a while and then it just stopped happening. It only shows a level of consciousness that's kind of beyond what some people think of as just an animal, that she came back. Sorry. Anyway, I had to write some of these down so I could remember them. And even so, I'll probably forget some of my encounters with animals, but it was very comforting um, for me to have her come back. The next thing that I remember that was really a huge impact on my psychic development, or whatever you would call it. I really liked the white tigers, and Mohini was a pretty famous white tiger at the time. And we were in Virginia, so we were pretty close to Washington, D.C., right outside. We were outside of Alexandria, so we were pretty close to the Capitol and the National Zoo. And so when we heard that Mohini, the white tiger, she had had a litter, and they were allowing people to see her again. I don't think that the litter was with her at that point because they'd had a problem before. They let the public in too soon, and she'd gotten upset and she'd killed her kittens or cubs or whatever they call them. So she was now able to be viewed by the public again, and everyone was very excited to go see her. So I went. I wanted to see her, and they didn't have very good zoos at that point. It was terrible. The National Zoo was just a horrible place for animals at the time. They had this big, huge, giant building with the cats in them, and they were like concrete, and they didn't have much room to roam and everything. So I'm so glad that that has changed as far as the environment that they're in now and how well they take care of them and make sure that they have what they need. But this was then, not now. So I was in this big room. Um, and there were 40, 50 people in there, I'd say at least. And I was, it took a while to get to the front because everybody wanted to see the white tiger. So I managed to actually finally get in front of her. And I'm watching, looking at her, very happy and excited that I'm looking at this white tiger. And I suddenly feel eyes like boring into the back of my head. It was very odd feeling. Uh, so I turned around, and above the crowd of the heads of the people, there was another um, enclosure, and there was a black panther in that enclosure, and he was up on this giant tree limb that they had. That was his decoration. Poor guy. Again, not much room, but he was on top of that large branch, and he was just looking at me. And so I turned around, and I was captured by his gaze. It just sort of held me in his emerald eyes, and I started seeing and feeling things like I was his mate, and we were running through the jungle and hunting and eating and sleeping in the sun. And I had a litter of babies, maybe more than one. It was just like a whole life kind of just flashed. And at this point, as I'm just sort of being in this moment, the crowd of people who were all looking like I had been looking this way, and then I was looking that way, and all the people, we were all looking this way, and then I turned around and was only looking that way, and then all of a sudden, all the people in the room turned around to look to see what I was looking at. And when they all turned around to look, the panther turned his back on everybody and sat down and wouldn't look at anyone at all. And I was just kind of, I don't know how to describe it. It was amazing. It was real. Um, it was visceral. It was like I had a life, like I'd been a panther in another life or something. I don't know if that's literally true or not, but it was definitely very much um, that. It just was a reality. It wasn't like a question of anything. It was like this happened. I can't even remember who I told or how I told it or if I told. I probably did because I have a hard time keeping my mouth shut. But but yeah, again, that kind of expanded my whole idea of consciousness. I mean, this was another level of consciousness and awareness and interaction and stuff like that between species. So another really incredible encounter that I had with animals. I was living in British Columbia for the first time. This was with my first husband before I got pregnant, um, before I became pregnant with my son. I think it was like Labor Day weekend kind of thing, and we decided to go to Vancouver Island and go to um, this beach on the western coast of Vancouver Island called Long Beach, which I think later I learned was a place where a bunch of people had died from that massive earthquake in Alaska. There were people that were camping there when the tsunami hit. I didn't learn that for years, though, I don't think. But we were there anyway, and we were camping down there, and I got up in the morning and was walking along the beach, and the way that beach is set up, there's a big spit of land that came out, and at the end of that spit, it was just deep ocean, so although it looked like it was like land kind of thing, it wasn't. It was just this prominent rock thing. And I started to see whales coming um, past this corner and then going in front of me. And they were gray whales. They were migrating, and there were a lot of them. We're talking thousands of individuals, I expect, considering. And then every so often, the orcas were with them, and an orca would like leap out of the water and splash, and it was just like astonishing to witness this event and be in this place accidentally to see this. And I probably stood there for 6 to 8 hours, I think, watching as they traveled by, wanting to go out there and touch them. I really had to restrain myself. I really wanted to just jump in the ocean and go out there and swim with them, but I just stood there, and they were anywhere from 60 to 100 feet out. I mean, they were close. They were so close and so amazing and beautiful to watch. And it just went on and on and on. So that was just kind of like a dream almost, a moment of dreaming to see that. And it wasn't until years later that I read an article where scientists had just figured out that the orca traveled with the gray whales, and I was like, I knew that like a long time ago. See, my son was born in 72, so this was probably in like 70, 71 or something. I think it was just before I got pregnant with him. So it was probably 71. But yeah, I mean, it was an amazing thing to witness. And I'm sure there's lots of people who, well, some people get the opportunity to witness a large migration of animals of any kind. It's just sort of an amazing event that takes place. So, so that was pretty cool. I don't know about any communication except for the fact that I really wanted to go out and touch them. But and then years later, the next one that I really thought about, I lived in Telqua. This was with David, my partner, and we rented this house from a local doctor who was going on a trip. He was actually going to try and get cured of cancer, some clinic in the Caribbean, I think, something like that. He was looking at different treatments, cancer treatments, to try and save his life. It was a nice place. It was really a nice house, had its own little lake kind of thing, so we had some definite adventures there. And the house was in an open area, so you got to see um, the sky really well. And there were two things that happened there that were significant. The first was when we first moved in, we hadn't been there for very long, and I kept hearing this noise, this howling sound, throughout the night. It seemed like it had been going on for hours, and in my dreams, and I finally woke up and realized it was actually happening in real life, and it was right outside my house. And so I got out of bed, and the sun was just coming up. And I got out of bed, and I looked out the window, and when I looked down, I was up on the second floor again, and looked down, and there were at least a dozen coyotes that were all singing at my window. Like they were facing the house and singing at the windows, like they were singing to me. And I was like, wow, because I'd never seen anything like that. And then the sun started to rise, and they split up into groups of three and four and went in like three different directions and just disappeared like within minutes. And I was like, wow, that's just so cool. So I told some of the local people in town because I was curious because, I'd not lived, this was the first time I really lived in the bush, as it were, like away from a lot of civilization. and they said that it wasn't possible, that they didn't act that way. So I thought, but I was there and I saw it happen. I mean, I wasn't sleeping when I walked to the window. I was sleeping when I heard them in the beginning, but I wasn't sleeping when they left. I just thought, okay, I guess animals do weird things sometimes that other people don't believe. So I guess that's that. I thought it was really interesting. And then in the same location, those coyotes were very interesting neighbors to have. And one night we were outside watching the northern lights, and I noticed this pattern. I don't know if anyone else has noticed this pattern. I'd be curious to see for those of you who live in a place where you get the northern lights and have coyotes. I'd like to hear your feedback on that. But the coyotes would start to get yipping really fast and loud and very, very excited, and then all of a sudden the northern lights would just start going and going, like really excitable, just really moving along. And then like coyotes would stop, they start slowing down and getting quieter and quieter, and then the northern lights would fade away. And that happened like over and over and over again. So this clear connection between the coyotes and the northern lights. I don't know if they were hearing something I couldn't hear, seeing in the spectrum I couldn't see in, so that they knew that lights were coming and started reacting to them before I could tell that they were there, or what. But it was over and over again. So it was a clear connection. And I tried to see if I could find any myths or stories about coyotes and the northern lights, but I never did come across any. So if any of you know of any of those, that would be that would be pretty cool. Um, so then when I was living in the Kispiox, um, sometime later, I think when I was in the house by the river, because it was just me and my kids, so I'd already left David. We weren't in a relationship anymore. And there was rumors about me leaving my kids alone and so forth. And I thought, really, people need to know what's going on and maybe they can help instead of judge, give me some support or something. So I went to talk to this woman who was one of the main people who was spreading the stories and talking about me in town. And I went to her house, and I don't think she actually was there, but I was trying to get to her door to like knock on her door and talk to her. And she had these two dogs, a German Shepherd and a Doberman. And they were, they weren't on leashes or anything like that. And they were outside. They were running around and they were barking at me and so forth. The German Shepherd in particular, and I just, stayed calm and kept on going and didn't interact in particular. And then I thought maybe I could calm this dog down because the German Shepherd was just going off like crazy. And I thought maybe I can calm him down, and I thought I could send him a picture of like food or, something that the dog would like, and like a feeling like I'm not a threat, everything is fine. Just like got this in my head, an image ready, and and then I looked at the German Shepherd and I had the most unexpected reaction. The German Shepherd screamed, tucked its tail between its legs, which I've heard of but never seen, and then ran down the road like the hounds of hell were after him. I felt really bad. I was like, oh no, what have I done? I've tortured the dog. So I asked some of my friends, I told them what happened and like, why do you think that happened? And one of my friends thought maybe the reason had to do with the fact that I'd actually made a telepathic link with the dog, and that was something the dog had never had a person do before, and it startled it. I thought, okay, I don't know, maybe that was it, maybe not. And in the same when I lived up there, I would go to the medicine wheel weekends. They did them once a year, and I went 4 years in a row. And I started getting an odd mix of random dogs coming up to me asking for healings, which I thought was kind of interesting. I would just be doing my thing, wandering around the 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 you know, getting ready for a sweat lodge or whatever, And a dog would just walk up and sit in front of me and just sort of look at me and go like, "Hey, got some time for some healing?" And I'd look at the dog and I'd go like, "Okay." And then I'd put my hands on the dog and give the dog some energy, and then the dog would go like, "Thanks," and then go away. I don't know how many times that happened. It was a pretty regular occurrence where animals would just come up and ask me to give them some energy. So I thought that was interesting. And that's where it was when I lived in the Kispiox that I had the encounter with the cow, which was another rather impressive, important, and intense encounter with an animal. My neighbor across the road, she was about a mile and a half, I think, as the crow flies. Well, just a little over a mile, maybe not a mile and a half. And her cow had actually gotten into her front door when she was gone and gotten into a 40-pound bag of grain, which is not good. The cow ate like the whole bag. Apparently, they don't have a off switch when it comes to grain. And the cow was in pretty bad shape. And she came to my house and she asked me if I would go to her place and see if I could, do healing on her cow. And so I thought, okay, I've never tried healing a large animal before. This is something new, but I'll see if I can help. And I went across the road, and it was kind of strange to have this really large um, head, heavy, large head in my lap. The cow was on the ground. She couldn't stand up, and she was the family cow, so she was very attached to her people. Um, and so, as soon as I tuned into the cow, the very first thing I saw was a very clear image of Hathor in the sky above us. So I knew she had come for the cow. It was like she's here for the cow. This cow is not going to live. But while I was working on the cow was in less pain. So that seemed like a good thing. So I stayed with the cow for a while and gave it energy. Um, and then, had to leave because my kids were coming home from school soon and I had to go back to my place, which was, like I said, a little over a mile away. But I told her I would send energy remotely to the cow. So I went back to my house cabin and went into a meditative state and connected with the cow and was continuing to give it energy when they shot it. This was a very surprising encounter because I was in the cow as energetically with the healing and stuff when the cow died. And when the cow died, I got pulled out into the other side with the cow. And I saw the cow's life flash before its eyes. I mean, it reviewed its life and the eating of the grain and how it died and all this other stuff. And all of this knowledge, experience, or whatever was going up into what I could only describe, I called the great cowness, this amorphous kind of energy above that the cow was going into. And then I didn't stay. I went back to my body because I wasn't the cow. But it was a big surprise and very unexpected and showed me that, again, there's more to animals and their spiritual afterlife, or whatever you want to call it, than we usually give them credit for or think about. And my idea arose in that moment that this is where instinct is from, is like the numerous times that this happens. If it happens often enough and long enough, then eventually cows will stop getting the urge to eat 40 pounds of grain at a time and killing themselves. They'll know somehow that that's a bad idea or they won't want to do it, which will save a lot of cows. But um but yeah. So that was an interesting thing too. It's like there's all these different little pieces of interactions with animals. And then when I was leaving British Columbia to come back to the United States on my way down to Santa Cruz, I had, like I said, been to the Medicine Wheel celebrations 4 years in a row. So I had just been to the last one, I think, that year, or maybe the year before. Anyway, it hadn't been that long. And was coming back down. And one of the things that was talked about the last one I was at were the octopus. And they were talking about how the octopus was a protective spirit for the Haida and Inuit people along the coast, probably especially the Haida, and because of all its arms and things. And I just thought that sounded so cool. I mean, how cool is that? And we stopped at the Vancouver Aquarium on the way down. And so we were at the aquarium and it was getting close to closing time. It was probably around 4:30 or something like that, and I think they closed at 5, somewhere in there anyway. And I realized I hadn't seen the octopus. So I checked to see what the octopus was, and and um, I found this aquarium. It was a big aquarium. It was not a small octopus, but octopuses are interesting because they can fit in so many little places and stuff. They're just amazing. Um, so anyway, I got in front of this pretty big aquarium and I couldn't see the octopus at all. And I'm looking around and I see way down in the corner in between a couple of rocks, I can see a closed eye and a gill moving just like a little bit. And so I know that's where the octopus is. So I'm crazy, right? I start talking to the octopus. I start talking to it out loud. I do all this stuff mostly out loud, which is probably strange for other people. But I just started talking to it. It's like, oh, I've heard so many beautiful things about you. I've heard how wonderful your tentacles are and your wonderful suckers and everything. And I would really, really, really like to see you very, very much. Could you please come out and show me? And all of a sudden, the octopus comes out of his little hole, which is, I'm astonished because I thought, I can't believe this is working. And he comes up and he's like right in front of my face, directly in front of my face. And he puts himself on the glass and then he stretches all of his tentacles out all over the glass and stretches them out so I can see every single sucker and all of his arms. He like covered the aquarium and I'm like beside myself with glee. I'm like, oh my God, you're gorgeous. It's like, oh. And then I thank the octopus for showing me his amazing, beautiful self. And then he puts himself back together and, it's like, can I go back to sleep now? It's like, yes, thank you. And he goes back into his little hidey hole and goes back to bed. I don't know what the people in the room thought, but I was just absolutely thrilled by this experience. And so, you know, again, communication, somehow, telepathy, feelings, images, whatever, my interest, my desire translated across language barriers and communicated directly to the spirit of the octopus and he let me see him. So that was really cool. And when I was in Santa Cruz, one of the things that happened when I was in Santa Cruz, I had a young man who was my boyfriend for a little time, a little while, and we were spending a weekend at a friend's place up Marin County, north of San Francisco. It was out in the country, sort of a little getaway kind of thing. And I woke up in the morning and I was on the second floor. I looked out the window, looked down, and below me there was a horse and the horse was tied to this tree that was there. I was looking at the horse and I'm just like tuning into the horse, and I can feel this energy in the horse. It's just like this, like, gotta move, gotta move, gotta move kind of energy. And I'm like looking at the horse and I'm going like, oh, you just really want to just kick up your back legs, don't you? And the horse starts kicking up his back legs a couple of times around there. He's just like feeling really frisky. There's a little snow on the ground, but it's getting springish. And I'm like, oh, you just really want to just like lay on your back and kick your feet up in the air, because I could see this image of him doing this, and then all of a sudden he rolls over on his back and puts his feet up in the air and starts going like this, and then jumps back up and shakes. You just really want to shake. He just shakes his head, um, and then I'm looking at him and I'm like, you just really want to run, and he broke his lead and started running down the road. And again, I did this all out loud, and my then boyfriend was sitting there watching this take place. And I looked at him and I said, so there's no telepathy between humans and animals, is there? And just walked out of the room. I thought, drop the mic. This is pretty cool. So, yeah. And he was with me when we went to Hawaii for the harmonic convergence. So it was what, 87, I think. I have a t shirt with the date on it. Anyway, we were there for the harmonic convergence, and we went to one of the zoos they had there, and I really wanted to see the African anteater that they had. And it was in the middle of the day, and it was hot, and the anteater was in his little house, you know, like a large dog house kind of thing, just a little habitat there, getting out of the sun and the heat. And I just started talking to the anteater like I did to the octopus. It's like, yeah, oh, I really would like to see you. I've heard a lot about your tongue and how long that is and how beautiful you are. And oh, it'd be so nice if you would just come out and just show me what you look like so I could see you in person. It would be so awesome. And then he comes marching out of the his little habitat and down his little slidey thing there, his little ramp. He stands there sideways, and I hear in my head, okay, here I am. Is this good enough? I'm going like, oh my, you are just gorgeous. Look at you. Can I go back to bed now? It's like, yes, okay, thank you so much. And then he turns around and goes back in his room. And my Bruce was there for that too. So that was kind of interesting. He saw two of my encounters with animals. And certainly there have been numerous times that other cats have communicated with me, cats that I've owned that have been, pets. We were living at Iron Gate Reservoir, which is in Northern California, and we had a cat who he liked to hunt. He would bring rats and line them up. We'd get up in the morning and we'd have a pile of things he had gone and given us for gifts. He was a very good hunter. And this one night, he was in my dream, and he came in my dream and he told me that he'd been bitten by a rattlesnake out in the desert, which would make sense. There were rattlesnakes out there, and that then a coyote came and ate him. And we never did find his body. I woke up in the morning and knew that he was gone. And I've had other cats do that too. Like we had Calliope when Calliope was our cat, and we were camping um, for this one weekend. We were only gone for a couple of days, and I was practicing seeing nature spirits during the day, softening my eyes and letting things come into view. And all of a sudden, I saw Calliope as clear as a bell, and I thought that's weird. And I commented on that. Why am I seeing Calliope? And then we came home and found her body on the floor, and she was probably dead when I saw her. I'm assuming because yeah, she'd definitely been dead for a while. And my cat Charlie Brown, who was like my other favorite cat besides Roscoe. Roscoe was my first, and Charlie Brown and we made just such a connection. He was like a wonderful kitty cat. I really enjoyed him. He was very, very smart and very emotional and very good at teaching us how to interact and stuff. And this was when Calliope was still alive, and Charlie had been dead for a while, been a couple years. And he's buried right here outside of our temple in the yard. And this one night, I was asleep, and all of a sudden, I felt a cat jump up on my bed. I could feel the weight of the cat, and he got my I I was like my back was facing this way, and he jumped up where my back was, and then rolled with his back against my back. So he was like leaning into me, and I could feel him. And I could feel his warmth, and he was pawing the blanket and purring, and I could feel all of that. And I was pretty convinced that Calliope snuck into my room somehow. I turned on the light, there was no cat. Calliope was sound asleep somewhere else in the house. Turned off the light, happened again. And I think it happened about 2 or 3 times before I was convinced that this was definitely not one of our living cats. And then I was doing a psychic check-in with my wards and stuff around the property, and I found a cat-sized door right where Charlie's body was. It was like a cat door in my energy field, and I realized that it was Charlie. So I'm like, okay, Charlie is allowed to come in. That would make sense that he would have special dispensation to get into my space. And he came and visited a number of times for a while, probably over about a year, I think. And I haven't felt him in a long time. I don't know if he'll come back or not. But again, it's like being able to feel the presence like that. We even had a ghost cat at one point when Charlie was still alive. Actually, I'd forgotten about that one, where I was in my bedroom and I saw this cat, and cats weren't allowed in my bedroom. It was a black cat. I yelled at the cat. The cat ran and knocked over some clothing off of a rack and then came running into the living room. And I chased the cat into the living room, and both of our cats were sound asleep on the couch. And they looked up and said, "What? What's going on?" I was like, "Okay, we have a ghost cat." So we even had a cat we didn't know that hung out with us for a while. So it's kind of interesting. And certainly there have been plenty of stories of ghost dogs and things like that. So, in my office, when I worked as a massage therapist with a chiropractor, the chiropractor I worked with worked on animals. He worked on dogs and some cats too. But one day I came into the wandering through waiting for a client, and I came into the waiting room, and it was one of the days he was seeing dogs and cats. And there was this golden retriever who was sitting there in the waiting room. And he caught my eye, and I went over to introduce myself and say hi. And he started telling me this story of running through the woods, and it had rained earlier that day, and there was a slick mud, and he slipped on the mud. He was chasing his friend. They were both running through the woods, and he slipped on this mud and slammed his shoulder into a boulder, and that's why he was there, because his shoulder hurt. So again, I'm saying this out loud as he's telling it to me. I'm like, "Oh, really? Is that what happened? You did this, and this happened, and then that happened?" And his owner was crying. Apparently, I made her cry because she knew I was right, and I don't know, she was amazed that I knew what had happened to her dog, and so that was kind of interesting. And I also had a dog client, Kojak. He was the first massage client I had, official massage client. And yeah, so that was interesting too, because he was a huge German Shepherd. He was very, very smart. And I would work on him for like about 10 minutes. They thought he had hip dysplasia and was going to require surgery. And I work on that part of his body for about 10 minutes, and then get up and walk around and then lay back down. So about a half an hour was worth of work, and it fixed him completely. he ended up becoming a seeing eye dog for the full time. And up at that point, they were going to wash him out of the program and give him major surgery. So that was kind of cool. We didn't have the same kind of talking conversation as I had with other animals, but we made a pretty clear connection for his body work, and so that was kind of fun. And then the chiropractor had his wife and I guess his sister-in-law, they had chihuahuas. And one day, the sister-in-law, her chihuahua was limping down the hall, and I'm like, wait a minute, what's going on? Why is this dog limping? And she's like, oh, he just likes to do that. He's trying to get attention. I'm like, yo, I don't think so. Animals don't do that. So I thought I should check him out and see if I could work on him, because I'd worked on the other the other Chihuahua, and yeah, both of them really liked me a lot in the end. So I thought at first that if she was sitting with me, the Chihuahua would be more relaxed, but it wasn't, because this Chihuahua was very hyper, and with her near me, he wanted to like jump all over, and I instinctively grabbed a hold of his little chest and just held him up next to me, and he just went limp. And then told me that his foot had gotten caught on his way out, because he had been very crowded in the womb, and he had hurt himself when he was born. And so I worked on his leg and fixed him up pretty well, and told her what he said had happened. And then she inquired of the breeder, and indeed, for a Chihuahua, there had been a fair number of puppies. So again, that was kind of a confirmation. But whenever the dogs would see me when I would go into the office, they would both lay on their back like this and go like, "Okay, I'm ready, anytime." Because often I like to work on their rib cage by having them on their back and working their spine, and they would just like go. It was entertaining and fun and sweet. Yeah, and I was the only one who could calm the guy with the leg problem. He was a very hyper dog, but not with me. He was just like, okay, whatever you want to do to me, you can do it. That's fine. And then Barney, the dog, the golden retriever, the chiropractor ended up keeping him. I guess he needed a home. He was being fostered, I guess, when I met him. And he had started acting out at their place, like something weird was going on. He seemed to be terrified. And so the chiropractor's wife asked me if I would ask Barney what happened. And I went into her office to talk to Barney and asked him what was going on, and really strongly smelled pine needles. Oh my God, it was something else. And I checked with her. She couldn't smell anything at all. I'm like, okay, it's one of those psychic smells I get. And Barney was very clear that there was like a cougar in the woods, and he was not happy about it. He was freaked out. So I told her. And so, things like that just happen. I had a recent one where I went into one of the local antique shops, and they had a little dog there, and he jumped up on the chair next to me. And the owner said, he's allowed to be on that chair. I'm like, okay. And I look at him, and he tells me his tummy's been bothering him and it's not feeling right. And I'm like, really? So I tell the owner, I said, he says that he's got a sick tummy. Is he sick to his stomach? And he said, yep. Of course, he thinks I'm nuts. But, it confirmed what the dog was telling me. So I think it is a matter of paying attention to what the impulses, what the impressions are that you're getting, how you're feeling and so forth, just like when you're communicating with any kind of spirit at all. It's like it's the same idea. It's like what's you and what's not you. And I think with an animal it could be more obvious maybe when it's not you, because the way they think is so different. But sorry about all the tears at the beginning. Although it was a good story, it was a sad one to start, but that was my life. And hopefully, this is giving people ideas on communicating with their own animals and getting impressions and so forth, and verifying when you can, that kind of thing. but it certainly opened up my eyes to the whole potential for consciousness being different from us. Just with the animals that we encounter on a day-to-day basis, the household pets that we have, there's things going on there that we can potentially interact with and tap into. So, this is Siofra Brad again, and this has been Siofra's Magic Alcove. Blessed be.